Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Crafting and Crime Daily. It's Friday. Ooh, yes, thank the Lord. Friday dance. Ooh. I'm Rebecca, your host, and I recap live trials. Oh, the sun is out today. God, I'm using some natural light today. Welcome. If you're new to the channel, I recap live trials so you have something to listen to while you're crafting or whatever else it is that you're doing. Anyway, I'm currently recapping the trial against George Kelly. He is a citizen of the United States. He's living in Arizona. He is currently out of jail on a $1 million bond. He had to put up his 100-acre ranch as collateral for this bond. Thank God he's out on bond because he was getting death threats in the prison or the jail where he was at. So he has this 100-acre ranch that he has a ranch house on. He lives on the border of Mexico and Arizona. And on January 30th of 2023, it's alleged that he shot and killed a person by the name of, and I always have to look it up, sorry, because it's not an easy name. Gabrielle Suen Butimia. Yeah, that's it. He and his companion Daniel Ramirez Valero, I remembered that one, were traveling, a group of men, 8 or 9 men, 9 I think if you include the guide, to find the American dream. They were crossing the border across George Kelly's property on the afternoon of January 30th. And if you want to find out more about Daniel Ramirez, he survived. There was one gunshot that went through the back of Gabrielle, out the front. The bullet was never found. According to the defendant, he did not fire the shot that killed this gentleman. He heard a gunshot, responded to the gunshot by going and gathering his AK-47, going out. He said he fired shots over the heads of the people that he saw, and he described them. They were wearing camouflage, they had large backpacks, and were running drugs across the border. Smuggling, drug smugglers, Mexican cartel. Interesting case. So, yesterday, we get the Border Patrol agent who responded. He was the first person on the scene. So after George hears this gunshot, he's making lunch and he hears this gunshot. He tells his wife to stay in the house. He goes out with his AK-47. His horse has been spooked. His horse is like running around like crazy. And he sees this group of men. And he says he fires a shot over their heads. He goes back in the house because they all run. They run. He goes back in the house, calls the agent. They have an agent that they can call, a ranch handler, so to speak, and he notifies Border Patrol. They got the call at about 2:40 p.m. And so this officer responds. He said it took him about 15 minutes to get there. He responded to the Vermilion Ranch. This is the name of George Kelly's ranch. And the call went out as people shooting on his property. So he goes out there. He encounters a gate. And so he stops his truck and he just walks over the gate and approaches this ranch house. And he's approaching the front door when a woman comes out, probably Mrs. Kelly. And she says her husband had heard a shot and he went off to the south, which is actually towards the border of Mexico. So this officer said, okay. And he gets back in his truck and he calls for backup. Because, if these are armed men, because that's what she said, they were armed. If these are armed men, he doesn't want to approach this by himself. So he waits for his partner to get to the scene. which is probably another 10 or 15 minutes. And right about that same time, the local sheriff arrives, and that was what agency was that? Santa Cruz County Sheriff comes out there. We're going to hear of that, some of those officers' testimony before the end of the show today. So he said he was concerned for an armed individual. He went back to his truck. He waited. Once they all got there, they first conduct what did he call it? A hasty perimeter check. And he did this to just make sure, he said they kind of walked around the house, make sure nobody's hiding there, and just kind of check the perimeter. After that, they conducted a search where they each went into a different direction. Now, he said the officers went one direction, the sheriff officers. He and his partner went a different direction. Apparently, he didn't go the direction that the shot came from. He went to a different direction. And now and as he's headed that way, he sees George Kelly coming back. And so he approached, and George has got his 2 dogs with him. They call them canines. He's got his canines with him. And he said they were very friendly dogs. Very, they were really, really sweet dogs. Very curious, running around, but clearly following this man everywhere. And he told this Border Patrol officer that there was a group of men, probably 8, I think he said 5 that he had seen. And that he knows these were not typical immigrants crossing the border, that these were moles. And he knows the difference between the moles and the migrants. So this officer was asked to explain the difference. And the difference is, when you have the families, they're not all dressed in camouflage with military boots on and weapons and large backpacks. And he said they were carrying large bundles of narcotics, is what George Kelly told the Border Patrol officer. The Border Patrol officer said he did approach him with the AK-47 but he was cradling it like a hunter would cradle a rifle. So he wasn't alarmed by it at all. He didn't feel threatened or anything because he was okay with the way George was carrying his weapon. He was asked by the prosecutor or by the defense, did you ever ascertain whether he had discharged the weapon? He said no, he didn't mention having discharged his weapon. And did you ask him? No, I didn't ask him. No. Now, this Border Patrol officer admitted that this is a dangerous area. This guy grew up in this area, and he's been on Border Patrol for many, many years. He said this is a very dangerous area for several reasons, because of the desert heat and because it's notorious for having bad individuals in this area. People that are armed, that are up to no good. The attorneys really had to pull things out of this guy. He just didn't want to offer up anything. What do you mean by up to no good? And he said, they're guarding narcotic loads. And then he mentioned rib crews. I'm learning all kinds of new things today. Rib crews. He said there are actually rib crews out there that will fire on these smugglers and then steal their narcotics. It's a thing. Then he was asked about, what did they call it? It's some fancy Spanish word for a ditch. I had to go look it up. But there's a ditch that runs along the property. And if these people are walking in the ditch, you can't actually see them that well. So this was interesting testimony. Now, I did want to backtrack to yesterday's testimony, Daniel Ramirez. So one of the questions I didn't answer that I had when I listened to his testimony, and I should have told you about this, was how did they find this guy Daniel if he ran? Because we know that George George's testimony is after all these officers did their search and left, later that night, he goes out to check on his horse, who had been spooked earlier during the day. He goes out with his dogs, are following him out there, and he's got his flashlight, and his dog's alert on something. He goes over to where the dogs are, and there's a body. So how did they find Daniel? So apparently, once Gabrielle had on him the radio. Regular immigrants, they don't carry radios. He had camouflage gear on and tactical boots. Regular immigrants are not wearing tactical boots. So it's surmised, or the rumors are that this guy was actually the guy that was killed. So how did they find Daniel? Well, apparently this guy had an ID on him. He had something on him that identified who he was. So when they notified his family, the family offered up, hey, you might want to talk to Daniel Ramirez, his friend that went with him. That's how they found this Daniel Ramirez guy, because Gabrielle's family gave him up. It's just something that had crossed my mind, and I wanted to let you know, just in case it had crossed yours as well. So after this Border Patrol guy leaves the stand, they bring in this old guy, another old guy. Now, George Kelly's 75, so this guy was probably that age or older. He takes the stand, and right away, sidebar, attorneys go sidebar. And they have a really interesting sidebar in this case. It sounds like you're in the shower. It sounds like rain, the white noise. I felt like I was taking a shower. And finally, the judge turns the white noise off and tells the jury, this is going to take a little bit longer than we expected it to. I need you guys to step out. So they step out. And the issue was that the prosecution was going to ask this guy about a phone call that he got from George Kelly, telling him to go out and check his fences, make sure nobody's cut your fence, because I saw a group of migrants and I shot at them. Well, obviously that's hearsay, but is there an exception to the hearsay rule? And the prosecution was arguing, yes, there's an exception. And they were offering it to show that this is his motive, this is his MO, his method. He goes out, he's looking for where his fences are cut, he's taking his AK-47 and he's shooting at stuff on a regular basis. And the defense argued that this was several years prior to the current incident, January 30th of 2023, and so very remote in time, and it was more prejudicial than probative. And the judge actually ruled in favor of the defendant and excluded this testimony. They were not going to be able to ask this old guy what George Kelly said to him on the phone. So now the jury comes back in, and this old guy is still sitting on the stand, and I'm thinking, well, what else am I going to ask that guy? So it did come out that, George had called him to ask him if anybody had cut his fence. But and I don't know why the defense brought this out, but he said, they asked him, do you guard your property? And he says, no, not really. He has like 200 acres. And he says, no, they said, do you go out with your gun? And he said, no, I don't do that. If I see, he goes, I've seen them 3 or 4 times, 2 or 3 times, 3 or 4 times. I've seen these groups of armed men all wearing camouflage, clearly smuggling drugs. And he goes, I just go the opposite direction. I don't confront them. Good idea. George probably should have done the same thing. You know my opinion on guns anyway. But in any case, that's what he testified to. That was it. So then the next couple of officers that they put on the stand were sheriffs from that, what was it? Santa Cruz Sheriff's Department. And they looked like they were 12 years old, especially the second one. I'm like, oh my God, that's a little boy. Honest to God, looked like a little boy. Oh no, I've been an officer for 8 years. Since you were 12? Yeah, little boy. The first one had, at the time that he responded to the call at George Kelly's ranch, was right out of the academy. He was doing field training. So he was with another officer, and he was asked about the search. And in his report, he called it a cursory search. And so they're like, well, what do you mean by that? He is like, well, we weren't doing a thorough search, but we all fanned out. We were all walking in a straight line, and we were looking for anybody that might be hiding on the ground. And they went through that area where that body was found later on that day, and they didn't find a body. So where did this body come from? Yeah, that's what I want to know. So that's where we leave off for yesterday. Now, today they have an expert on the stand. So they're taking him out of order. He's testifying about his expertise. His area of expertise is like shooting reconstruction. Yeah. So it will be interesting to hear, I'm sure he's going to say that it came from the direction of the house, like shooting reconstruction, like they wanted him to map the trajectory of the bullet and where would it have come from and that kind of thing. All right, that's the show for today. I know it's not a lot, but it's a Friday. Don't forget, my friend Mickey Sunshine Creates. She does a live on Friday nights at 6:30 Central Time, 7:30 Eastern. I have another friend, DP Addiction Adventures. She's going to be live tonight at 8 p.m. Central, 9 Eastern, and you don't want to miss out on that. I'll be live Sunday at 11 Central, and I hope I see you then. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care. Bye.